Welcome to a little bit of London that is forever Jaipur.
Dear friends and lovers of literature, here we are again with JLF at the British Library 2021.
It's a particular pleasure for me to come back to the British Library, which has been my office in London for many years, and where my books have all been written and researched, and it's very nice to see this end of my life sort of double back on it.
Our amazing writers, today more than any time, because of the way the digital age has taken over, we need you to be able to make sense of the past, divine the future, and perhaps set in context what we're going through at this very point of time.
Do you feel that Britain and India can best intersect culturally?
Well, we've been intersecting for a long time. It's not that we will have to intersect. If you look at our cultural and historical relations, we go back a long way.
That may be nations or cultures or religions or sexualities, class, culture, gender, race, all those things, but that distance is somehow reduced or bridged because we're connecting at a very basic human level.
I believe in the ability to convey meaning by the written word is our superpower.
Good afternoon, my name is Wajiha and I am very delighted to be welcoming you today on behalf of Teamwork Arts and the Aga Khan Foundation to the 2021 edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival London at the Aga Khan Centre. This year, the festival will present a full programme virtually next weekend from the 24th to the 26th of September. I ask that you please do register on the jlflitfest.org website to allow yourself to be transported to a land of literature, ideas and debate, where we discuss and discover aspects of fiction, environment, geopolitics, food, culture, history, religion and spirituality. I want to take a moment to thank all friends and supporters of the Jaipur Literature Festival for always supporting so wholeheartedly. This year, I would like to especially thank our partners Rajasthan Tourism, TRS, East End, ICICI Bank United Kingdom, University of York, and British Council Wales for their support. Our first session today is the Soul of Sufi Art, featuring Moin Mir in conversation with Christopher Wilton-Steer. Author Moin Mir began writing under the influence of his grandfather, a scholar of Sufism, Omar Khayyam and Mirza Ghalib. He speaks of the varied aspects of Sufi art, its philosophical geometrical symmetry, and its mystic musical traditions. Moin Mir's latest book, The Lost Fragrance of Infinity, published in June 2021, is a novel that gives Sufism and its contributions to humanity, philosophy, mathematics, and art a much-deserved voice. Christopher Wilton-Steer is a travel photographer and head of communications at the Aga Khan Foundation UK. His latest exhibition, The Silk Road, A Living History, was recently shown in London's King's Cross and is due to open in Toronto on the 15th of October. During this session, we would love to hear your thoughts and questions on the conversation, so please feel free to present these to our speakers during the question and answer segment towards the end of the session. You can access our sessions at london.jlflitfest.org. All our sessions will be available to view on our Facebook page and YouTube channel also. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Soul of Sufi Art, Moin Mir in conversation with Christopher Wilton-Steer.
Thank you very much, Wajiha, and thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Moin, as well. It's great to have you here and to have this conversation today. I have to say, when I received Moin's book, I was so excited because it had so many themes about in it that are interests of mine, from craftsmanship to history to travel, and so I was kind of delighted to get involved in it. But I enjoyed it especially because of it's this journey that our protagonist takes us on across Mughal India and then into Central Asia, the Middle East, and on to Europe. And I've travelled to some of these cities myself, or places and regions, but seeing them or reading about them described from a historical perspective was particularly interesting and evocative, and really transported me to another world. So hopefully we'll talk about some of that today. Before we get into the book, I just wanted to ask Moin a little bit, and for the benefit of everybody here, because some people will know something of Sufism, but not all. We know it as the inward dimension of Islam, or Islamic mysticism, but tell us a bit more about Sufism and its relationship to Islam.
Thank you all for being here today, and I must take the opportunity to thank Jaipur Literature Festival, the Aga Khan Center for hosting us, Christopher, whom we reached out to host this session, and you very kindly agreed. I loved your exhibition. To answer your question, the relationship between Sufism and Islam, I think the question itself is such that today people probably think of Sufism and Islam as two different entities, when it's not. Sufism was the heart of Islam. It was the heartbeat of Islam. It was the philosophical side of Islam. It was not the ritualistic side of Islam. It was not the side where rules and regulations and laws were imposed on Sufi practitioners, as well as on people who came into the faith. Having said that, the Sufis were unimpeachably Muslim. They believed in their faith and they practiced it as well. But for lack of better expression, it was the more liberal, the more creative side of the faith. But it's the lost voice in many ways of the faith today. Today, Sufism, is confined to visiting a shrine of a saint, listening to a beautiful qawwali, probably having biryani and going back home. It's not, people are not taking a deeper dive into what the Sufis propagated in terms of a philosophy. And it was the philosophy of Sufism that created an effulgence, if you wish, of creative thinkers, both in the arts, in the philosophical sphere, in science, in mathematics, and it infused, the philosophy of Sufism infused in the Sufis a spirit of creative thought, imagination, curiosity of the world in which they lived in, curiosity of nature, curiosity of themselves as a created microcosm, as man, and the relationship of man as a created microcosm with the greater creative force. And so these were the deeper philosophies of Sufism, which are totally in sync with Islam. And so that is the relationship between Sufism and Islam. It's the heartbeat of Islam.
And these, Sufism was a large part of it was part of the royal courts of the major Islamic dynasties and empires back in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the role that they played at those courts?
Well, spanning Budapest in the Balkans, right up till Bengal in India, and that's a massive landmass. You have the Sufis influencing court within the Ottoman Empire, within the Safavid Empire, which was in Persia. The Ottomans were in Turkey, and the Mughals in India. What is also the undeniable truth is that the Sultan, who was in Istanbul, the Shah in Persia, and the Badshah in Delhi were deeply influenced by Sufis. The Chishtis, for example, in Delhi had enormous influence on the likes of Akbar, on Jahangir, on Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was the last Mughal emperor. The Safavids kept great Sufi thinkers and poets close to their courts, like Saib Tabrizi. The Ottoman sultans, revered the Mevlavi Sufi order of Rumi, as well as the Betakshi Sufi order, which was extremely liberal. And you had, because of these empires being influenced by Sufi thought and Sufi masters, you had, a massive amount of tolerance, a fair amount of exercise and exploring science, nature, art, and you see that across that entire belt spanning, Budapest all the way till Bengal.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship between Sufism and art writ large, particularly in terms of sacred geometry, dance, music.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Which features in your book, of course.
Sure. Just before I come to that, I just wanted to, talk about a little bit about because of this creative mind that the Sufis had, and of course there is a lot to be learned in terms of the tariqats of the Sufis. So you have the Chishtis, the Mevlavis, the Naqshbandis, the different orders of the Sufi of Sufism, and some of them were a little bit more orthodox, like the Naqshbandis were. The Chishtis and the Mevlavis and the Betakshis were far more liberal. And they influenced, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each emperor or Badshah or Shah, but let's take the example of Dara Shikoh. And a lot has been written about Dara Shikoh, but not very many people know that Dara Shikoh, a practicing Sufi, was at the forefront of translating the Upanishads into Persian. He was at the forefront of translating the Bhagavad Gita into Persian. And it's because of his translations of the Upanishads that Europe opened up its curiosity levels towards Indian philosophy. So that was the kind of fertility of mind that the Sufis had brought. Coming to your question about their influence on art.
And their manifestation in art.
Yeah, and the manifestation in art. So it finds its root in understanding creation and creativity. And the Sufis reach a stage through meditation, through asceticism, some of them, where they are, in Sufi terms, reaching vasl, which is a union with the divine. There is no longer the veil between the divine and the created. And at that point in time, because there is a sense of integration, there is this burst of creative energy which flows and which is like this torrential downpour, which you see in the most exquisite art forms: tile making, miniature painting, poetry, songs, dance. All of that becomes a manifestation and a rendition of reaching a stage of becoming one with the divine creator, or immersing yourself, or submerging yourself in divine love. So geometry.
How did they get to that point?
Well, they get to that point through mysticism. They get to that point through understanding themselves in relationship to the greater creative force. There's a lot of discipline involved. There's a lot of understanding of the Quran as a philosophy, and understanding it in terms as a philosophy, as Ibn Rushd said, rather than as a rule book. And so when they reach that stage, you have this burst of creative energy that just comes out, which is brilliant. And it manifests itself, for example, let's talk about tile making. Some of the most beautiful art forms are the geometric tile shapes. You see them all the way from Andalusia and right into Delhi. And you see a mastery of geometry, trigonometry, mathematics into that. So there isn't a divorce happening between spirituality and science, or mysticism and mathematics. And it's a very difficult concept to kind of understand, where they're not separating logic from spirituality, or reason from spirituality. And a large number of the Sufis in Isfahan started making these incredible tiles in varied geometric shapes. Now, a large number of the Sufis claim that the origins are from the Arab lands. Some say that they originated in Central Asia. Some say it originated in Persia. No one really knows the truth. But the mastery of geometry and trigonometry manifests themselves in these different shapes, and they interlock together. So you've got pentagons, triangles, squares, circles, all interlocking together and coming together in a repetitive form. And they were then called the tiles of infinity, because when you repeat these incredible designs, it becomes a design of the infinite. And I'm not an art historian, so I haven't really, studied Sufi art form in its academic variation. But through my research, through travel, through reading, and through visiting, fantastic places like this incredible mosque in Bursa called the Yeselkami Mosque, was a phenomenal experience, because I walked into this mosque and it was early morning. Sunlight was streaming through the stained glass windows, and in a corner was this mystic, this incredible Sufi, just sitting there whirling his tasbih beads. He smiled, and I got speaking to him, and he took me outside, and we had this incredible lot of craftsmen sitting there making these incredible tiles with clay. And I asked them to explain what this whole art form was. And they explained it in an incredibly different way. They did not go down the academic route. And they said, look at this square, look at this triangle, look at this pentagon. And they all interlock. They're different shapes, they're different, they look different, but they all come together. And this is the beauty of diversity of mankind. So these tiles of infinity are the tiles of the infinite quest of the Sufi to bring mankind together. And after they interlock, they come together in the form of a star. And that star is the star of enlightenment. And then they say, we repeat that again, because you never reach full enlightenment. And you will only reach full enlightenment when you reach a stage of fana, etc., which are great Sufi, theosophical, kind of philosophies. But the beauty of that thought, of tiles of infinity being the tiles of mankind, the diversity of mankind coming together. And then when you look at it through that lens and through that prism, all the way from Delhi, Samarkand, Isfahan, Bursa, Istanbul, Andalusia, it's magical.
So this, in a sense, is a kind of manifestation of the Sufi value of kind of pluralism or respect for difference and people coming together to create a more perfect whole.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Perhaps we could talk a little bit about whirling as well, which obviously of the Mevlani order. Tell us a little bit about that, what's going on there, and what we can draw from that.
So when I was in Istanbul writing my book, I had the good fortune to study the master Sufi called Ibn Arabi in the Koç University, and also engage with the Mevlavi Sufi order, where you yourself have been, Christopher, in Istanbul. And the whirling dervishes, of course, are probably one of the most beautiful sights that one can see. They bring an extraordinary amount of serenity to your heart when you see them whirl against the backdrop of a beautiful flute, and it's extremely serene. But as I was spending time at this tekke, which is the lodge, the Sufi lodge, I had the good fortune once again to meet one of the Sufi practitioners, and I asked him, to explain this art form of dance, and he said again that there are variations and completely different, explanations, but this is mine. And I heard him, and he said, "Watch the head tilt." And the head tilts of the dancer, and there is one hand, the right palm, will face upwards, and the left palm will be down, and so the right palm receives and the left palm gives. It's all about balance, and then they whirl, and the world is about balance. Life is about giving and receiving. And then he explained the white robes. The white robes are supposed to be resplendent with the beauty of a dove taking flight in peace. And then he explained, which you did as well in your photography exhibition, the long cap that the Sufi dervishes wear, which is made of sometimes of fur, sometimes of terre, which is a particular material, and that represents the tombstone of their ego. So it's the destruction of your ego, it's the balance of life, and then eventually the freedom of a dove, which gets you to fly.
So the dervish is having his, or in some cases her own experience by whirling, but those who are observing are also receiving this lesson.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to that in a little bit. I thought it might be a good opportunity just to ask you a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you were inspired to write this book.
Well, I wrote the book because I have to admit the reason why I wrote the book is because a large number of people, when I would encounter them, when I would meet them, would say things like, oh, I'm a Muslim, but I'm a Sufi. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to me, or it didn't mean anything to me at that time. And that was one of the first triggers. The second was I was utterly mesmerized by this tile work that I found in Andalusia, the Gire tile work, which basically means the tile work of the knot. Gire in Farsi, in Persian, means knot. And I was mesmerized by the tile work. I was mesmerized by the philosophy that this fantastic tile maker spoke to me about in Bursa, about how deep thinking this philosophy of tile making was. And then, of course, there's a certain heritage that I have. My ancestors were practicing Sufis, originally from Herat, many years ago. And so those were the three reasons that I wrote the book.
And your grandfather was a scholar of Sufism.
He was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, we should probably talk a little bit about the book for those who are unsure about exactly what it's about. I will try to summarize it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's set during the early 18th century, during which time the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Safavid Empire are sort of experiencing troubled times. And our protagonist is a tile maker called Kara. He's based in Delhi, and for various reasons I won't go into, he has to flee, and he takes this epic journey and has to overcome all sorts of different hurdles. He goes up through to Central Asia, across Iran, into the Mediterranean, and across to Europe. And I was just curious, why does he take this journey? What was the inspiration behind this particular journey? I should say, along the way, he is doing some wonderful tile work and teaching a lot of people about tile work. He himself had studied under a Sufi in Delhi.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I got the protagonist to undertake this journey is because, firstly, I initially thought of writing an academic book on Sufism, and I very quickly realized that the core of Sufism is love, ishq, and you can't write about ishq and love, through the lens of an academic. And so it had to be a novel, and so the protagonist, was built around a narrative of a craftsman's life. The quest of a perfect life is not the quest of the Sufi. The quest of a perfect life can be our quest. You want to live a perfect life, you want a perfect home, you want a perfect wife, you want, a perfect family, all of that. But perfection is fragile and it's brittle. And so I took the life of a vulnerable craftsman who faces the most turbulent times and set him against the backdrop of Nadir Shah's invasion in Delhi in 1739, where he witnesses carnage, savagery, barbarism of man, and the complete destruction of what it is to be a human being. The savage, the beastly side of a man that descends in, on him and on his life. And then through that destruction comes restoration. And I've used the metaphor of the restoration of great buildings, of tile work, as the restoration of his life. And it's through the philosophies of the Sufis of love, kindness, generosity, even forgiveness, that this protagonist attempts at rediscovering love and at rediscovering a way forward in life.
And that use of, you spoke about, this protagonist, he restores many beautiful buildings across Central Asia and elsewhere. But this relationship between Sufism and restoration, perhaps you can talk about that, perhaps a sense of renewal even.
Once again, I come back to this fabulous conversation that I had with the Sufi in Bursa. And when you write a novel, I'm a big believer that it's all about your experiences and what you experience through your journey, while you're exploring possible avenues to take your characters through, etc. And during my conversation with this incredibly learned man, the one thing that came about was restoration is more important than creation, and these were his words, because creation doesn't need restoration. A created object at some point in time will need restoration. And so restoration is far more important than creation. And so we see a passage of play, if you wish, in the book where the protagonist realizes that it is only through the restoration of his heart, and it is only through the restoration of his soul, of imbibing the virtues of kindness, generosity, and forgiveness towards the people who have done him wrong, that he can progress in life. And so that's why the importance of restoration.
Very good, thank you. We spoke a little bit about our protagonist's ego, or rather the ego of the whirling dervishes, and of course he himself has moments where he himself has to go through a great deal, and he makes great efforts to recognize the role of his ego in his life and to try and mediate that as well. And there's a wonderful passage in the book, which I hope you will be open to reading out about that, to give a sense of some of Moin's writing.
So this is a time when the protagonist he's reflecting on his losses, his loss of love, his loss of his family, his loss of of his stature as being one of the most chosen artists in the Mughal court, and his current life. And it's through the verses of Rumi that he's able to restore his life. So I'll read a little passage for you. On many an occasion, after giving lessons, Qarar would not go back to the barn, but instead he would wander away for long walks on his own. He was aware he was getting esoteric in nature. His inward journey gave him peace. There were moments when his ego had been awakened. In those moments, he was Qarar Ali, the renowned craftsman who had been the chosen hand of emperors, khans, and sultans. His hand had brought life back to the majestic buildings from Hindustan to Spain. That voice told him he was the greatest restorer. He was the one to which every brick and every tile should bow. That voice mocked at his current status as a mere geometry teacher to fledgling minds in a remote village. Where once he had been paid in sacks of glittering gold, now he only got the smiles of children and a handful of coins. There had been a time when he had been the love of a woman who had shimmered in diamonds, sapphire, and emeralds. Now he was the love of a peasant's daughter who appeared in simple stitch. How he had fallen, said that voice arrogantly within him. But then, as that voice rose menacingly, another voice within him overtook it and subdued it forever, the voice of the Sufi. During his walks in the wilderness, climbing mountains and shrubbery ridges which took on the look of pink velvet in the Spanish sunset, the verses of Rumi left his lips, drowning his ego completely. See how in pride they go, with lifted head, till fate with a sudden blow smitteth them dead. Flowers every night blossom in the sky, peace in the infinite, at peace am I. What makes the Sufi? Purity of heart, not the patched mantle and the lust perverse, of the vile earth bound men who steal his name. He in all dregs discerns the essence pure, in hardship ease, in tribulation joy. Then in his own words, Qarar reached deep within himself. A true Sufi gives all he has. These are your greatest moments, when a child's sterile mind stirs with a thirst for knowledge, because you have planted a seed there, you shall find yourself standing right there with a water canter. This is your contribution to mankind, your khidmat-e-khalq. Nurture these saplings.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this journey, he's trying to cope with his own voices, his own demons. This is the journey of the Sufi, right?
It is. Now, it's a journey of going inward, and the Sufis never went external. They went external in their discoveries through science, through mathematics, through philosophy, through generosity. But that outward manifestation of an evolved creative mind only takes place when they go inward. It's the inward journey that is more important. It's the inward journey of destroying your ego. It's the inward journey of understanding who are you as man. It's the inward journey of understanding how you can influence people with goodness, with simple deeds of goodness. And that's what the protagonist does when he finds himself in Andalusia in Spain. Just simple deeds of goodness.
And is that enough? Because we know some Sufis live a monastic life, some with very little, some spurn all worldly things. But can you live a life as a Sufi without doing that?
I don't know if you can live a life of a Sufi without doing that in this day and age, but the one thing the Sufis did not do is, there's a word in Urdu, Arabic and Farsi called tark, which basically means abandon. they didn't abandon their worldly ways. Yes, a large number of them became ascetics and all of them, but also a large number of them stayed within this world. They were family men. They had a wife. They had children. They did not completely sever themselves from worldly affairs. They led normal lives. They taught science and philosophy in their khanqahs, which were bastions of knowledge. So I don't know if you have to be an ascetic to lead a Sufi life. I'm sure a lot of them did that, and some of them still do that. But I don't think you need to do that to live the life of a Sufi.
Sure. I mean, we were obviously this is set during the mid 18th century, at a time when Sufis had such a prominent role in the administrations of these great empires that you talk about in the book. And influenced either the sultans or kings, or in fact they were themselves Sufis and practicing Sufis. So that philosophy was really embedded into these empires. But that isn't the case. Sufi thought and Sufism is not embedded in the same way in modern administration. So why has Sufism struggled, or why has it become part of the periphery in today's world?
Many reasons for that, and I think a lot of them are political. I begin the book with a non-fictional introduction. Although it's a novel, the introduction is non-fiction. And I believe the turning point came with the loss of the Ottomans at the gates of Vienna in 1683, the death of Shah Abbas in 1666, and before that, the assassination of Dara Shikoh in Delhi in 1659. And from the latter half of the 1600s, you see these great empires shrinking, and the Sufi being alienated from their courts. The Sufis cry his passionate call to invest in exploration, to invest in maritime exploration, to invest in philosophy, in the arts, starts diminishing. And as these empires start declining, you don't see that kind of importance being given to it anymore. And as I said, today, unfortunately, it's got confined, to a visit to a dargah, or to listen to a qawwali, and listen to fables of a Sufi who rode a lion and had a snake as to whip the lion. These are the things that it's got confined to. But the real thought of Sufism that Ibn Arabi preached, which was through the lens of metaphysics, not many people are reading that. Not many people are reading the contributions of Omar Khayyam to mathematics and geometry. And Omar Khayyam might not have been a practicing Sufi, but he was deeply influenced by Sufism. So the loss is, I think, because it hasn't received political patronage. You have a whole new kind of Islam that is now prevalent, which is troublesome. It's a one-dimensional kind of politicized Islam, which manifests itself in Taliban, which manifests itself in intolerance. And the Sufi voice is the lost voice. It stands as a mere echo in the ruins in Persia, and the ruins in Alhambra, and in the ruins of Anatolia.
I think it was Ataturk who, when he came to power and during his modernization period in the early 20th century, he dismantled a lot of the Sufi houses and the dervish houses in Turkey, because I guess they were seen as anti-modern, right? And some of it has made a comeback since, but do you think there's a comeback for Sufism in today's world?
Well, one lives in hope. So, I'm the ever optimist.
Good. Well, let's return a little bit to some of the themes of the book. One is metaphor, which you use throughout it. We look at, for example, you mentioned about the geometric shapes, different shapes making up a whole with the star in the middle. At the center of the book, I mentioned, is this craftsman Corral, but he is together with a group of a troupe even of others who come from very different worlds. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
So as the protagonist is compelled to leave Delhi, which is his hometown, after having lost the love of his life, having lost his entire family, without revealing too much of the book, and I'm hoping that you'll buy the book without me giving away too much of the story. He finds himself in complete isolation. And there's a fantastic poem by Rumi, which I don't remember offhand, which says that it is through isolation, it is through remoteness that the beauty of color will emerge. And he finds a way to make his way from Delhi to Samarkand, and from Samarkand into Isfahan, and then into Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. And as he's going through this journey, restoring these fantastic different shapes of tile work in these different mosques and mausoleums, he starts attracting different friends. There's a prostitute who becomes a friend of his. There's a slave trader who becomes his friend. There's an acrobat who becomes his friend. And so these all become symbolic of different shapes of the tile work and different shapes and shades of mankind, and how he embraces them and how he brings them into his life and how he enriches their life and how their diversity enriches his life. And so I've tried to use the different varied shades of characters and characterization to show the coming together of mankind as he is restoring the different shapes in the tile work.
I wanted to also ask, you mentioned about the love of his life, and love is a theme that permeates throughout the book. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, from your point of view, the relationship between love and Sufism. We spoke about can you have love in your life in that way with an individual as a Sufi, but perhaps you could unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I said that, at the heart of it is ishq, which is love. And according to the Sufis, they're close to 308 different meanings for ishq. So, you can't even begin to define it. But without love, creation is not possible. And I'd like to recite a couple of lines from a poem from one of the great Sufi masters called Sadi, who was a Persian Sufi master. And these verses are attributed to him. We don't know whether, in fact, whether he said them, but nevertheless. And he said, God said, I want to be loved. And because I want to be loved, I created creation. Now I can be loved. So even God wants and feels a necessity to be loved. But it also gives you an insight into how liberal the Sufi mind was. He could reach that far and say that even God has a necessity. Do you know what I mean? And of course, many Sufis lost their heads to clerics because they went that far. But that is the importance of love. And you see that in the love that Rumi and Tabriz have. You see that in the unimpeachable truth that Ibn Arabi was madly in love with a woman called Nizam. He couldn't look beyond her, and he fell in love with her in Damascus. One of the greatest poets, Hafiz, who was deeply critical of hypocritical Sufis, was madly in love with a woman called Shaki Nabat, and he attributes most of his poetry to the love of the woman. And it is through the love of these women that the Sufi is able to reach and see the divinity of the creator within the woman. So he's able to see the beauty of God in a woman. And now, at that point in time, he's worshipping God through the attributes that he's seeing in a lady. But on the other hand, he's also reaching a stage where he can lose his head because, he could be called out for blasphemy.
It's a precarious balance.
Precarious balance.
Just one more question from me before we open it to the floor. The Lost Fragrance of Infinity is the title of your book. Why did you choose this title?
When I was researching these incredible geometric tiles, I read that these were called the tiles of infinity. Peter Liu is a great Korean physicist, and he did an incredible research paper on the tiles of infinity. And these are the tiles of infinity. And when I saw them, and not just, and I don't mean just seeing them and walking past them, but when I actually saw them in Delhi, when I saw them in Samarkand, when I saw them in Bursa, and when I saw them in Andalusia, I did realize that, you know, Sufism is the lost fragrance that we all need to bring back in many ways in our lives.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, we have a little bit of time for some questions, so over to you, and fire away. Please.
I have a question about the concept of ego death that we were discussing earlier, and it seems to be something that's quite central to the act of Sufism and other mystic philosophies as well. Do you think that in the perspective of a Sufi, achieving ego death via a substance, such as ayahuasca or some other sort of mind-inhibiting substance, would be in a category of acceptability, or does it have to be a pure ego death that one experiences through just hardship and rot and just being uninhibited by a substance?
You know, I don't know how the Sufis would react to that, because I'm not a practicing Sufi. I always say that. Some people say, you know, you're a Sufi, and I said, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not a practicing Sufi, but I'm inclined towards it. But to answer your question, I think you don't have to go that far to destroy your ego. And through my life, I've come to learn that through just simple acts of goodness, you slowly start eroding that me, myself, and I. Just small little acts, you know. You could just you know, get up and give your chair to someone to sit. You could very well see a fig tree dying and water it, rather than saying, oh, I'll come back in the evening and I'll water my fig tree, you know, later. Or I might see a decaying plant and just walk past it. But I might just actually stop and you know, buy a bottle of water and water it in the middle of Hyde Park or wherever. I think when you start doing those things, you don't need substances. I think substances are clutches, but each one to his own, you know. And it's all about going within and starting within with little acts, and then you kind of start, you know, yeah.
Just begin from the conversation you had. I want to ask about how madhab-e-ishq is so essential for, whether that's poetry, even for the other art forms that exist in Islamic culture. I wanted to ask, how would you read Ghalib? Those people who had all the work related to the madhab-e-ishq itself, but in some point they do not relate to the existence of Sufi orders. And how is your study on this? Would you still confine Sufism to a systematic study, or to people who belong to certain tariqah and have been following a murshid peer narration? Take an example of Ghalib, but so many poets in South Asia, from Kabir Pant to Bulle Shah, even to Joe Nelia, to that extent. So I really want to know that.
Yes, Sufism has its orders. At least had its orders, and there are some still very alive and active. The Mevlavi order, which is the order of Jalaluddin Rumi, Hazrat Jalaluddin Rumi. Then you have the Chishti order, which is very, very active in India, Pakistan, and they have these tariqas. And you have the Betakshi Sufi order, which actually which the Betakshi Sufi order, deeply Muslim, came up with the concept of, you know, women do not need to wear veils. They need to go out and engage with men and build cross-pollinated societies of thought. So while these orders did exist, and there's a kind of, you know, you don't really have a leadership that you really see, but you do see a few sporadic voices. the mazhabi ishq bit that you spoke about, the love for faith, is prevalent in all of them. Now, Ghalib, the likes of Ghalib, have been also called...
not love of for faith, but love itself is a faith.
Yeah, love itself is a faith, yeah. And Ghalib himself, you know, professed once that if I was not a drunk, I would be called a saint, you know. So the truth of the matter is that, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, you do not have to be confined or boxed in to these orders. You can be if you wish, and they have a certain discipline that they follow. Also talking about things like generosity and love for all and all of that. But you don't have to step into that realm. You can also stay out, watch them, learn from them, and that's what Ghalib did, and that's why he wrote immense amounts on philosophy. You know, Ghalib is known as a poet and a love poet and all of that. But if you read him deeply, and if you read him, which I'm sure you have because you've asked this question, he was a great philosopher and a thinker and someone who looked at the status of man in relation to his creator and all of that. So yeah.
I feel a little depressed about the title.
About the title.
Well, I'm working with disability and inclusion.
Yeah.
And it's not actually tied up with any religion as such. But I thought it would be quite interesting for you to say a little bit of how the Sufi scholar, can't get his name, he translated the Sufism, Upanishads into Sufism.
Yeah.
And I wondered if there was any common ground that he could have blown up between Upanishads, Vedantism, and Sufism.
Yes. Thank you for that question. And the gentleman that I was talking about was the Crown Prince of India. His name was Dara Shikoh. He was chosen by Shah Jahan to succeed him. A deeply devout Sufi, practicing Sufi, not just someone who is, you know, for lack of better expression, flirting with the philosophy, but actually immersed himself in that. He was trained by Moin Mir and Hazrat Bari, who were two Sufis. He had taken Bai'at to become part of the Qadriya Silsila, Qadriya Sufi order, and a practicing Sufi. And because of that, there was this effulgence of creative thought that emerged from his mind, and it made him hungry for more. It made him curious. It made him imaginative. And he did a competitive analysis, not competitive, sorry. He did a comparative analysis between Hinduism and Islam, and he wrote a book called Majma'ul Bahrain, which went on to become a pivotal piece of work. And in that book, he actually talks about the Upanishads and he talks about the Quran, and he says that the difference is virtually minimal. In the Quran, they talk about Ruh-e-Azam, which is the great soul, and in Upanishads it is Paramatma, the great soul. In Quran it is Nur, which is the light of the divine light, and in Upanishads it is Sarva Prakasha. So he was doing this fantastic work, and it's a pity that he was not a great general, because he lost to Aurangzeb, and he was, you know, he didn't take India forward. But yeah, I mean, you know, a wonderful example for practicing Sufi who tried to bring great faiths together, the two great faiths, Hinduism and Islam.
Should I ask just a very quick question?
Sure.
It's a very difficult space when you talked about the destruction of the ego, you know, and I think Christopher did bring up what were the various tools and processes to do this, the destruction of the ego.
Did you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, he did.
Yeah.
I think, of course, it's impossible. As you know, it's called Nibbana.
Yeah.
But how does the modern Sufi try and do? What are the tools he uses?
Yeah.
Not the old-fashioned hermit or monk.
Yeah.
Modern Sufi.
I still have to come across this concept of a modern Sufi. So I don't know, but I think the one thing that they did, the two things that they did to destroy their ego was zikr, which was a repetition of one of the 99 names of Allah, one of them being either the loving or the kind or the merciful or the generous, and that would be in isolated meditation, where I would suspect they would reach a phase of understanding that they were just a microcosm in comparison to the great creator. And the second, which I have actually witnessed, is preparing meals and actually with their hands going and feeding the poor and the unfortunate and the ones damned by destiny, and literally immersing themselves in their lives where they become one with that person. And I think these were the two things that they did quite regularly.
Right, any other questions? If not, we're running a little bit late, so we should probably wrap it up quite soon. Okay, well, thank you very much, Moin. This has been a wonderful, fascinating talk. Moin's been described today as a towering talent and an extraordinary voice by the New India Express.
I feel dwarfed.
So please do buy his book. It's available outside from now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you all for coming out on a grey Sunday. Thank you.